My name is Bradley Steyn. I was born in Pretoria, South Africa. Growing up, I witnessed firsthand the brutality of hate and apartheid. And as a teenager in 1988, I survived a massacre that would change the course of my life forever. And that's why I decided to take a stand and join the intelligence unit of Nelson Mandela's Spy Network. In the course of our dedicated efforts during that time, we successfully unearthed a sinister plot to assassinate Nelson Mandela at his 1994 inauguration. This was a pivotal moment in South African history. Would we go into civil war, or would there be peace? But it also marked a significant stride towards advancing human rights for all us South Africans. Little did I know, a hit was placed on us, and I just managed to escape South Africa and find refuge abroad. I used my experiences and my expertise and teamed up with leading security professionals, where I was fortunate enough to work with some of the most fascinating people in the world. Now I'm back in South Africa, ready to take on the rising tide of crime, murder, and corruption that has tainted South Africa's journey towards liberation and our democracy. Join me, Bradley Steyn, your co-host, along with journalist and author Janet Smith, and our special lineup of guests as we go undercover. In this series, we will be declassifying our past, while we bring you the untold stories of our silent warriors, activists, and patriots. We'll also get a different perspective from our youth, where our democracy is today, 30 years later. Through these conversations, together we can shape the future we aspire to.
Byron Stradum's racist massacre on a public square in Pretoria was one of the defining events of the last years of apartheid. It was November 1988. Global condemnation and international boycotts were finally grinding the world's supremacist outpost to a halt. But even as expectations grew that there could be a peaceful transition to democracy, some, like Stradum, believed whites were being betrayed. The former policeman and army conscript set out to make his statement in the most horrifying way possible. In total, 8 black people were the victims of his rage. The blood that covered the piazza outside the State Theatre also came to mark the boundary between freedom and a form of captivity for Bradley Steyn, who was a teenager when he walked into the mass shooting. Bradley's life was spared by the killer because he was white. Yet that bloodied boundary was so destructive to his mental health that Bradley eventually put down those experiences and the astonishing true life events which followed into a non-fiction thriller, Undercover with Mandela's Spies. This podcast takes you on a journey with Bradley and a number of extraordinary guests to examine the toll South Africa's battlefields has taken on our minds and how we can continue to work on our shared recovery. I'm Janet Smith, and in this episode we welcome Steven Bosman, musician, creative individual, and Bradley's nephew. The reason why Steven has joined us for this podcast relates directly to the name of the episode, How to Fight the Pain of Loss. Steven and Bradley share a particular anguish, which we will explore. This episode is created in honor of Stradum's 7th and 8th victims, 29-year-old Msongela Johannes Mnisi and 62-year-old Sattar Abdul Karim. Johannes was shot in the chest in the City Soul Jazz Bar record shop on Prinsloo Street. Sattar was shot in the hip and in the jaw area in the same record shop while he was trying to assist Johannes. Thank you for joining us. I'll hand over to Bradley now to introduce you to his nephew, Steven.
Hi, and thank you all out there for listening to our podcast. Welcome, Steven. And like Janet said, Steven's my nephew. He's one of my closest family relatives, and he's quite a few years younger than me. So I've seen this young, inspirational man well, this young inspirational boy grow into a man. And one incredible thing I've seen recently, he's a drumming teacher, and one of his students has just won the international drumming competition in Los Angeles in the United States. And in an interview, they asked this young man, what inspires you the most? And instead of him saying some famous drummer, he actually said his drumming instructor Steven was one of his most inspiring people. And that just moved me so much, because I see the talent in this young man, and but I also see the trouble in this young man and what he has gone through. In 2018, Steven's father and my sister were on their family farm outside Nelspruit, where armed individuals broke into the house and overwhelmed my brother-in-law, John. He alerted my sister, who locked herself in a bedroom and barricaded herself in there, while John tried to take on these assailants that attacked him. John was brutally murdered and stabbed, and ultimately ended up losing his life while trying to protect his wife. This has ultimately been a very awful blow to my family, to my sister, to my nephew Steven and his brother Dylan, and our whole extended family, because Steven has had to face his own mental health challenges, as has the rest of our family. Steven, I know this is very difficult to talk about, and I just thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. I think that this is it's definitely not an easy thing to talk about. I guess that time where getting the phone call and then hearing your dad's last breath was, I think that was when the paramedics arrived, and then they confirmed that was just as he passed. And they managed to catch one of the individuals. The man is an extremely violent human being who has murdered many others out in the plain daylight in the streets.
Out in rural Pinar in the Eastern in the Mpumalanga.
Yeah. And just meeting those families as well, it's been tough to realize that he's not the only, that's not his only victim, and those are the only victims that are known of. He's probably done much more, which obviously he's not willing to testify to. But I think that was definitely a traumatic experience in just taking in, just having to drive. We drove down that same night, and dealing with that, and then being there back home, and seeing all that blood on the floor was, I'll never forget that. I'll see it at least once every time I close my eyes. I think that it's something that you can just never unsee, and I think that that's the same for my mom. I think that she can never unsee anything like that. I think that everybody really came together for, as a community. There were so many people very helpful and just amazing, and just supportive, I suppose, helping my mom feel safe and secure, and just helping her to get back on her feet and figure out, at least, because nobody tells you, but when someone dies in your family, it's just a lot of admin. You don't really get a lot of time to grieve as you think you do. It's mostly just admin, some signing some document you don't even know why, but death is admin. And I think the awareness and all that sort of stuff, it was on a farm, yes, and that was when farm attacks were a very large at that time. So it definitely, struck a nerve with a lot of people in South Africa. And it was really amazing how it came around with, just everybody coming together. But it felt that it was a bit strange in the way it was. There was so many weird questions asked, especially like when my Uncle Brad went and he did a social media post. When you did that post on Facebook, and I think there was YouTube as well, and you got so much backlash, which you were just trying to make people aware of, this is violence and crime on one another, and you got so much backlash that it was very difficult as our family to see this as, you've just lost a parent, or in my mom's case, her husband of marriage of 30 years or more, and then we see another one of our family members getting put down for trying to be supportive, in the sense of, this is still South Africa, needs to come together, and we need to stop the crime, the violence. And it became about racism, which the history of everything, where people are still stuck in that age, and it's ridiculous. I actually still can't believe that people still think that way. They're still stuck there, and just attacking someone who has brought the country to a point where, been a part of, bringing the freedom of moving within the country, everybody being, I don't know if you could put it that way, but free.
Thank you, Steven. I think it's absolutely clear, and we can hear from your voice that this is a grieving that doesn't end.
No.
You were unprepared for it in ways that people cannot imagine unless this event has happened to them. And judging by the recent crime statistics, we know that this is an event that has altered thousands and thousands of lives this year alone, in the first quarter of this year. So thank you so much. And I think in terms of Bradley and that link that you have made to the way that Bradley responded is a very important starting point for this discussion. So Bradley had occupied an odd position in terms of this. Bradley had already incited some aggression from his own community of white middle-aged men who had been through a particular era in South African history. All of them, most of them, conscripts, trained in weapons handling. Many of them had gone into conflict situations. So their view and their outlook on South Africa was still stuck there as an 18-year-old and 19-year-old with that experience. And yet Bradley had sort of turned on his own community by then being recruited into the ANC, still as a very young man in his early 20s. And that confused a lot of white people. So he already occupied that place. And then he put out this social media post that, I guess, reflected on that confusion. On the one hand, his absolute devastation at losing this man he'd loved, and who was your father, your brother's father, his sister's husband. And on the other hand, having to be very careful, I think, around explaining some aspect of South African history, some aspect of South African politics. It was a farm attack. It's never going to be that simple and that reductive when it happens to somebody you love.
Well, of course not.
And so Bradley was sort of stuck in that place of having to be these two people.
Yeah, what was really interesting at the time was that, I stated that, my brother-in-law, who I love dearly, I'd known this guy, since I was 3 years old. He taught me how to be a Blue Bull supporter. He taught me about rugby. He was an incredible guy that had a construction company and was a budding strawberry farmer, aspiring strawberry farmer, and just gave so much to his larger community, created so much employment and so many lives within his own little bubble of work that he did, were completely disrupted by the senseless murder. But you know why I think I got targeted was because I didn't state that, that this was a farm killing. I stated that our beloved ANC, had really dropped the ball, and how disappointed I was, and that I am, with the ANC and with our national security leadership within our country, making our borders porous so that different people can come in, and transitional crime, cross the border crimes, etc., and just how badly run our country was from a national security point of view. And then I said that, crime affects all our citizens, even the ladies that help us in our homes, and on Fridays go home and get in taxis and are terrified that they'll get raped or robbed. And that crime affects everybody, and that, us collectively, we really need to step it up and make a difference. And, that's ultimately what I'm going to continue to do, is champion for against this crime, and against, our vulnerable citizens being targeted and attacked.
Stephen, your knowledge of Bradley as an individual, aside from your family connection to him as your uncle, must be somewhat received. In other words, you knew that Bradley had this experience when he was a teenager, and you knew that he had battled with trying to, I guess, still those images in his mind of having been caught up in the massacre on Stratham Square, in your hometown. Now your hometown. Nelspruit was your hometown. Bradley has that history circling around him all the time.
Yeah.
And so when you were defended as a family by Bradley in this loving way, you probably didn't realize that numbers of people out there would see it through the prism of Bradley's history, and they wouldn't necessarily be touched or as touched by the fact that Bradley was also a family member, a brother-in-law, an uncle, and so on. How difficult was it for you then as a family to see that additional trauma that Bradley went through? He was trying to support all of you, but he was also trying to retain a particular persona that he had attracted, out there in the world.
Well, I think maybe I should start somewhere a little bit before that. Growing up as a kid, I only knew, in my teens, I knew my uncle as a guy who, bodyguarded the celebrities of the time. You see, I don't know, Prince walking, and then there's my Uncle Brad in the background, kind of, those, and this is like pre-Facebook days where you could just find a photo like that. It was only later in my later 20s that I actually, learned about the whole Stratham Square and all of those, things through my cousins, telling me about, his hardships and, the difficulties of dealing with that PTSD and dealing with, trying to make his way in the world and still try and keep in touch from such a far distance. I think that, he's made himself into someone who is, can be extremely sensitive as a family loving, person. And also on the other side, he has to flip to, a man of security, a man of considered violence, or at least from an outside perspective, with being bodyguards and part of the, having to, fight a war, essentially. A war on whether it be, just racism or just against the person who's just being, hurt, the little guy, basically, the underdog. So, with that, and then also his, his budding career in just becoming, an avid South African who just wants to make the country better, because this place it's like a place, it's like looking at that kid who just is budding with a ton of potential, and just that kid is just too lazy. It feels like, and then I feel like there's so many people trying, and I think that's beautiful. So when he put out the post, I think the first thing that I thought, and actually all of our family thought, was, this is his way of channeling how to reach out. I don't think any one of us thought about like, there was not any sympathy or anything like that. I think it was more just realizing how angry everyone is in this country, how angry and how much they, in their own way, are struggling with their own PTSD. Whether it's, I don't know, when any South African goes to bed at night, they're doing, like about 4 or 5 locks, before they go to bed, and that's not including alarm system, if assuming you have one. That's every South African, there's no safety, there's no security in this country in terms of your life or the possessions. You have a constant thought process of, when you get to a set of lights and you're looking in the mirrors constantly, not to check if you're going to get robbed, if you're going to either lose your life or lose that possession, and you have to make a choice, and you have to think, don't worry, I've got insurance, I'll be fine, or you don't, and there it goes. And that's just a factor of part of life, and that's where I think watching that makes me think, that's where there's no coming together. It's every South African for themselves and kind of fighting. And then, yes, we're all friendly to each other, but there's a point where I feel that, that the country's kind of lost its way in that sense. And that's where I think that the strength is, trying to reach out and try and, just, I don't know, I guess it's a little
do
bit
better.
Yeah, a little bit woo to say, but just, be good to each other. I mean, that's where I think the country is, and there's a joke now, which is, what's our biggest export, our fruit or the people leaving the country in droves, professionals, because I mean, Australia and all those countries, they're just taking every single professional that they can take. And the funny part about that is there's a whole there's now a South African PTSD in all these first world countries, because there's so many South Africans out there, and they're so used to waking up in this absolute, they hear something at night and they wake up in fear. And this is 3 years of living there in a safe country where you're not in fear of crime. And, it's just a raccoon knocking over the bin. And, a few of my friends have said that, where it's the weirdest thing that's, something you actually have to start getting used to. And some of them have to see psychologists just to deal with that PTSD of living here and not even being a victim of a crime. And I think that should speak volumes of just, that reaction, I think, is just, no matter what your view is, I think it's just a cry for help.
So this returns us to the title of today's episode, which is How to Fight the Pain of Loss. So in Steven and your case, you are fighting the pain of loss of John Bosman, farmer, father, uncle, builder,
Blue Bull
supporter. Steven is a young South African, very young.
I turned 33 now.
You're young.
Getting old.
You're young. You have a very different outlook on what it means to be a South African. And your circle shares your outlook,
Sure.
which is, joyful about this identity and fearful. So there are these two persona again in all of you. But fighting the pain of loss is also about what you've just described. The loss of a feeling of being protected by a new country that included everybody.
Well, there is no protection. There's no. I mean, like for example, the detective. He quit. He quit because he was explaining to us that he couldn't go and investigate a certain lead because there were just not enough vehicles for the detectives, because there's more detectives than there are cars at the police station to go and, there's only 3 cars or something like a car at the police station of the whole of Nelspruit. I mean, that is a city now for many years. I think it's...
And the frustration, I remember hearing about the frustration that he was going through because he couldn't actually do his job properly.
Yeah, he couldn't do it. I mean, to this day, it's 2022. My dad died in October of 2018, and his trial is in 2 weeks. And it only started this year because of the amount of postponements. Granted, COVID-19 obviously played a massive factor, but it has not gotten much further. And granted, I don't think it's going to go well, but it's...
Yeah, there's a very good chance this guy who's currently incarcerated, who's part of a gang that operate out of Pinar in Mpumalanga, who go around and attack a variety of different people, even within their own community. Steven was talking about meeting the witnesses earlier on, and these are witnesses, black people from Pinar, who this guy had a problem with, and he walked out into the street and shot somebody, but they are terrified of these gangs, and they're terrified to become witnesses and to talk out about them because they know the police can't protect them and look after them because there's one car working in.
Yeah, I mean, people have taken it into their own hands as well. Not from our side, obviously, but I mean, as in general for fighting, crime. There's whole communities at the more outskirts, not so much more city centers, more the smaller towns around. And there, if there's a crime, they will take care of it, and they've uprisen to that. But there's another whole offset to that, which is now anybody can just cry wolf about somebody who stole something, and then this person's going to get extremely hurt for doing possibly nothing just because you didn't like that person. And so there's just a lot of flip sides. There's vigilantism. There's a whole bunch. And I've often, I'm a person who, I had to stand 3 meters from this man in the court and look at him in the eyes, and that was, you stand there and you have thoughts. You have like a ton of thoughts going through your head. Well, there's a gun over there. It's 2 meters away from me. I can make this man die if I really, really wanted to. And you know what the worst thing that you stand there and think about is you can't do that. You just can't do anything. It's not that anymore. You just can't do anything. There is no help. You're helpless. You're helpless. That is it. You are just helpless. You kind of just have to live with the fact that you cannot do anything unless you turn to, the illegal, to crime yourself. Yeah. And then you're just becoming the problem that you already have, has approached you to, has approached you to destroy your life. And your family and everyone around you, and make everyone who is within a perimeter of yourself miserable for whatever amount of time.
So I just want to, if you don't mind, just ask Steven a question. So Steven, your mental health journey, what has been the fallout? Have you felt depressed? Have you felt anxiety? Can you tell us what the journey was and how you've been on this journey? I know you and I have discussed this many times.
I used to be an avid runner. but I've quit that. My dad used to be a massive runner, and I just can't do it anymore. But I would say,
why? Because you think too much of him while you're running?
Yeah, I used to.
Yeah.
I used to do pretty well. I used to hold like school records and stuff like that for whatever time, and I always used to call him after like a race or something like that. And even though it'd be stupid, it would just be our way of connecting. And then I think the depression did kick in pretty hard. But that's any loss and anxiety. But I mostly buried myself in work. And I think through the support of love and from my fiance and my family, I think that has been massive strides forward. But I think that having to deal with that, even dealing with the whole psychology, I don't think I have fully gotten through it. But I do believe that what does make a difference to me and has pushed me is to at least turn whatever that anguish and anger and terrible feeling I can into either something. Going and playing drums, I think, is definitely a great outlet for me, or any just any physical labor that can lead into a positive way. That's the only coping mechanism I have had to manage to develop for myself. Other than that, otherwise it's mostly just.
Was there a point where you decided, I have to get help? I need to see a therapist. I have to go get help. I can't carry on like this anymore. I'm losing my mind. Was there a point like that?
Yes. Lots of fits of rage. I came home often, and if it would be just stress from work or something like that, it would be something that would just flip my switch. It was like I was like a person who was on steroids or something, where there was just anything would trigger them. And I think that was definitely a moment for me where I was fighting with everyone for everything, and I think there was definitely a point where I needed to call for help and go and seek that. And I received that, actually, thankfully, through my church that I was playing for. I play for a church, Choose Life Church out in Pretoria. And the one day I went to one of the guys, Bruce, who's a massive help there, and he was my guiding light for just somebody willing to sit there and just guide me. So I think, and that's a place where they're willing, and they were like, look, this is beyond us. We want to give you a little bit of psychological help. And they guided me to actually get some psychotherapy.
Which is really interesting, because you're not a religious person. You were playing at the church, to make money.
Well,
as a job is what I'm saying, and it was my happenstance that...
I would say, I've always been fairly religious. My family's not necessarily religious. I just never push that onto anybody. It's a personal... I believe everybody has their personal journey, and I've always found that, playing drums at that church is... the closest I've ever felt to religion or God. So that was a massive moment for me, and then them leading me towards that path was that was they were the ones who were actually there for me and never really pushed it on me. They were just there as a support, and I found my religion through that. It strengthened it, and then also performing there's nothing quite like it. That is a place in my mind where, if you want to see a good community and a place that wants to grow and just grow the people around them for the sake of it, that would be a great starting place, the way that they structure it, I suppose.
So the pain of loss, from your perspective, has been relatively well described. You can feel it. You can articulate it. It comes in many different forms, and you're going to have to go on supporting your mother and your brother in different ways throughout your life, as they are going to have to support you. Turning to you again, Bradley, around the pain of loss, I think this is an aspect that your family has had to carry you around. So, if I may correct my grammar there, your family carries you around your various forms of loss which you have experienced. And your mental health journey around your experiences it's quite a weight. It's quite something for your family to bear, in the sense of not always understanding absolutely where it comes from or the granular detail of it. But as we approach the end of this episode, we perhaps need to admire and give love to all the South African families who continue to try and understand each other's losses.
Because there's so many
ways.
stories out there of exactly in different ways.
And we do immediately feel drawn to those stories which are affecting us as a nation. People leaving because they can't bear to stay. People wanting to become angry with you, Bradley, because you're a target for various unresolved issues inside themselves. People not able to take the term farm attacks and come to grips with everything that circulates around that. And those listeners who perhaps heard the episode, an earlier episode, in which we spoke to Letlapa Mpahlele, who was a director of operations for APLA and is now a forgiveness activist. He was talking to us about how residual violence, and it's an intense residual violence that we see today, really comes out of many untied
resolved
threads. We can't look back, make sense of everything that's going on. Not enough communication about things we didn't know about each other. And so I want to ask each of you how you would advise other South Africans within your own communities. So in your case, Steven, young South Africans, how to fight the pain of loss on a broader level. What would you think makes sense to you now that you've been through this experience? What can you filter through and share with other people?
That's a good question. I think that it's very easy to go to lose your path, especially with there's a lot of people with them projecting their own prejudice and hate upon you to and them to live vicariously through you with your anguish and anger, and then just they want you to portray their beliefs in terms of people who have
their ideologies.
Their ideologies, which they're in terms of being racist, and where it's that usual thing. It's guaranteed it's going to be hating black people, and it's disgusting the way that people do that. And I think that's especially where you're still easily influenced as a younger generation per se. You're looking to somebody as an elder of elder community, and you're looking to that community to give you guidance, because they've obviously gone through war, they've gone through some anguish, and they've obviously had a longer time, and those are the people that you generally look to get a direction, because you don't know what to do next. You really don't. You just feel stuck. And I think that's it's too easy. People find, I think that a lot of people tend to go that way. I've seen some of my friends who've experienced that, and they tend to go that direction, and it's just ridiculous. I think it's silly. But I think that the whole thing is that you need to find some form of a way to communicate or talk about it, or at least a way to have some form of a coping mechanism to build yourself into a better person, because there is only one way, and that's to look at that and learn from it and help you. It's a part of you now, so make it a building block to making it a better person than destroying yourself.
Bradley?
I just want to take a step back and just say something that it took me over 30 years to find closure around the Streydom Square massacre. And Janet, you actually helped me a lot with that when we actually started researching the names of the victims of the Streydom Square massacre, who we've dedicated this series of podcasts to. And for me, figuring out what their names were, figuring out a little bit more about them, and we're still constantly searching for more links to those people and those survivors or victims. But through that very process of going through that, I did really well, and I got better. Because we were talking about it, unfortunately we had to go to archives, and I had to see the brutality of what Streydom did to these victims, and going through the autopsy files. These things were very, very traumatic and triggering, but I also felt a lot of closure with that. So I'd encourage a lot of people out there that, and us losing Bozzy, my brother-in-law, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of stories of people from Attridgeville to Durbanville to all across our country. So many people have been affected by crime. So many people are so incredibly desperate in our country because of COVID, for instance, and the fallout from COVID, to our unemployment rates. People are desperate. People are hungry. People are just so vulnerable and will act out in ways out of desperation because they can't bear to see their children hungry anymore. And I believe us collectively, if we push these politicians to the side that are constantly trying to divide us, and I keep going back to rugby, and it's just amazing to me how rugby just does wonderful things for our country and the spirit of our country. If we can just not rely so much on government and rather just build our relationships and our friendships in communities, understand each other's different cultures and where we come from. We don't necessarily need to like it, but my mom Stephen's gran always used to walk down the road and smile and wave at, and just be kind and acknowledge, hey, I see you there, fellow human being. And it's amazing. She taught me that at a young age, and it's amazing how, that might be exactly what that person needs, is just a friendly smile, because they might be going through a world of pain, and that's what they needed to just get through what they're going through.
Bradley, I think, just to interject, there will be listeners who don't know what transpired in those posts and what those posts contained. So if you can just summarize for us what you wrote in those posts and why you managed to have as many people supporting and loving you through those posts as you did, directing anger at you for these two different reasons. You were an ANC person, so there were those people who were angry with you because you were an ANC person, and then there were those people who were angry with you for perhaps betraying a white history that people say they played no part in, or they shouldn't have to account for.
Yeah. So I decided to make a video on Steven's front porch of our family farm in Nelspruit, and I said, and we'll add a link to this or something where we could show this post, and I filmed this and saying, oh, this is a beautiful country, but how disappointed I am that the ANC has failed us, that our national security is in tatters, that crime affects everybody across our country. And what ended up happening was the Burger newspaper, or the Bild newspaper, picked up a story and decided to run a story. But, you know, being in the clandestine world, you don't talk about clandestine operations, etc. You know, we keep the stuff to ourselves. We don't talk about it. But in the article, it came out that I was recruited into Mkhonto Wesizwe, and I was involved with the Department of Intelligence and Security out of the Western Cape, under the command and leadership of Andre Lincoln and Jeremy Veery. And that story broke, and then this social media post started picking up and becoming more popular or whatever. But what ended up happening was a lot of white South Africans, a lot of them conservative white South Africans, turned around and said, "Jy's mos 'n verraaier, you have betrayed our people and our race. You can't, you've run away and lived in America." The reason I lived in America, because it was too unsafe for me to live here. The other reason they said is that, that I have my brother-in-law's blood on my hands, and
because you had fought on the side of the ANC.
Because I had fought on the side of the ANC, and that and because the ANC was doing such a piss poor job at running our country, that I can't be crying now over spilt milk, because I was part of that. But
so you had, from their point of view, you had relinquished your right to comment on this,
and that he was
as an
part
impartial,
and that I was part to blame for,
which he is not, and
helping the ANC get into power, which I had a minuscule role in contributing to the liberation movement. There's bigger heroes, etc. And then, but which was incredible for me was that my mentor, and my handler in the ANC, Jeremy Veery, who at the time was a major general in the South African police force, turned around and said Bradley's betrayal was a righteous betrayal, and he wrote this very moving letter about, I don't know, can you recall any of it?
Was this Andre Lincoln's one?
No, Jeremy Veery's letter stating that, at least I did something and stood up. And
you said something where it was in a place where no one was saying anything really, except just hate from either you're going to be extremely left wing or extremely right wing, and somehow this became a political battle where and everyone was either just hating on other sides, but there was no objective or any point just to speak at all. There was
cohesion. Yeah.
So this is a reflection of that sort of chaotic place where we find ourselves in. Jeremy was trying to endorse your bona fides, right? Bradley is a patriot, and he was seeing it through his prism,
through his lens, being my handler.
That's
in
right.
MK, yeah.
And what a beautiful, important moment for you and your family, that somebody of that stature could stand up for you.
Yeah.
Yet that only deepened the anger from those people who saw you as a traitor.
Yeah. And
so we're stuck in that place right now. And in terms of Steven's need to be quiet, come to terms with his father's death, this is noise. all of it is tremendous amount of noise.
And to me, I got to be very blunt with you. It actually really pissed me off beyond belief, because all I wanted was my family to grieve. All I wanted to do was just call the ANC out, call Becky Cele out, call our national security ministers out, and just say, you know, what the hell, let's sort this out, let's get our stuff together here. And but it just and there's noise, just my sister and I are incredibly close. My sister, his mom Lee, basically raised me because my mother was too busy working at the State Theatre and my dad was working at Grant Mackenzie's in Pretoria. So my sister and Bozzy, John, helped raise me, and it kills me still to this day. My sister left. She just came to visit us in Cape Town. She left 3 days ago, and I still, I see her pain, I see her anguish, I see how heartbroken she is, and it infuriates me because I'm so frustrated, because I can't do anything. I can't, like Steven said earlier on, I can't go and kill that guy, because, you can't do that. But it's just being twisted, and his legal team are manipulating the system because they know they can.
So as we bring this very tough episode to a close, and thanking you both again, I do want to reflect on Bradley's strength around Strydom. And Bradley's life has been much, much bigger than Bar and Strydom and walking into a massacre on Strydom Square. However, that is a defining aspect of Bradley's life.
I mean, he's not. As said in the the introduction, that's led him to. I mean, it was an extremely unfortunate circumstance, but he made that not only he made it a pillar of his life, that he has lived an incredible life. I mean, an incredible life. Seriously,
yes,
I mean,
he has
traveled the world, more places than most people bear to boast. And not for reasons, where most, corporate, no shots to anybody, but, traveled the world and seen different places and with different people, where most people would pay millions just to sit next to that person, would be, that life it's just unobtainable. And then on top of that, it's, where most people are, just attaining either, some wealth or fame. He's gone and also found a deeper sense of meaning in life.
Yes.
In terms of career path, in terms of family, in terms of mental health, in terms of actually finding himself as a person, and then also coming back to the country that he fought so hard for, and reaping the rewards, but still fighting. And on top of that, I think that's huge.
Mm. I think what I wanted to reflect on in closing is your urging when I first met you to meet Strydom, and you weren't sure what you would do if you met him. And when we were discussing these various opportunities that you had open to you to engage with him, what made me curious was why do you want to be in the space of Bar and Strydom, who brought you so much pain and, as Steven has said, such a strange and involved life. But you did meet Strydom in the end. And so as we close this podcast series, I wonder if I could ask you just to mention what that was like. Yes, you met Strydom under what one would assume are false pretenses. You didn't say you were Bradley Steyn. You didn't say, I am, that boy who was holding one of your victims on the square. And you made eye contact with me. And in fact, you tried to have a conversation with me while I had a dying man in my lap. You will not have forgotten me. But you handled it a little differently. I think you just wanted to have a sense of him. And then you could develop a little bit more closure. But that will go on. Your mental health journey goes on.
Yeah. And, this is an ongoing thing, and it's an ongoing story. We still working on a podcast, on a documentary that talks about, this journey that I've been on, witnessing this traumatic event as a child, and, my journey with mental health, and this incredible life, that Steven just spoken about, and, my wife of almost 20 years, and who's my rock and my pillar, and, who's just been remarkable, and my support group, my mentors have just been incredible, from Los Angeles all the way to South Africa. But to answer your question, Janet, it was important that we got some FaceTime with Steyn, so I spoke to some of my former intelligence community friends, and we set up a bit of a ruse and took some artwork to Steyn's business. He's a art framer in a community outside Pretoria called Hardebeespoort Dam, and I took some old Boereoorlog, Boer War memorabilia to him to frame, and I was because I've been in the States for many years, I have picked up a bit of an American accent. I got a bit of a twang, and so I didn't say very much. I just accompanied two people, and under the auspices of getting these pictures framed, and I just summed this man up, and how lonely his life is, how scared he must be every day when he walks out of his house. And the biggest gratification that I got from that whole encounter was paying him with Madiba's face on the money. That brought me a lot of joy. But just to also see that this man,
he has his own loss.
He has his own loss, and he lives in a very cold and dark and lonely place. And I'm just glad I'm far from that. So, yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.